Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast, where hope matters. I'm Clara Hinton.
And I'm Clara Hinton, and we're so glad that you've joined us.
If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Well, thank you again for tuning in to the Speaking Out on Sexual Abuse show. I'm joined with my mother, Clara.
And I'm so glad to be here.
And we want to talk in this episode, this is our very first episode, we wanted to talk about why we chose a podcast as a platform. Mom blogs over at her website, which is findingahealingplace.com. I blog over at my website, jimmyhinton.org, but you're kind of limited both in time and space whenever you blog. And so we thought having a podcast where we come together just would be a platform that makes sense. So we're just going to talk about a few reasons why we, in our conversation, we chose to go with a podcast. First and foremost is just the volume of private messages that we get asking for help. I don't know about you, Mom, but I know there's not a single day that goes by where I don't get at least a handful of emails from people just asking for help. I mean, they're desperate.
Right, and it's the same with me, Jimmy. For at least 2 years now, without fail, every week I get multiple emails from people asking for help. And it's difficult to do that sometimes through the written word. Sometimes you can't answer properly.
And there's no way that we can answer all the emails.
The volume.
And that's, I think, probably most people don't realize when you're sending us messages, we're getting those from literally all over the world.
Right.
And just the sheer volume, and you and I both work full time, and we just can't answer them all.
No.
And certainly not adequately.
Heartbreaking to us not to be able to answer each individual one. So we're hoping and praying this platform will take care of some of that.
Yes. So another reason is just the lack of resources that are out there for family members of abusers. And that's an area that people just don't think about very often. And, we have resources, albeit some not very good, and I think we need to have a whole lot more out there, but we have resources for survivors, but I have yet to find more than, I know of maybe one off the top of my head that's a resource specifically for family members of abusers.
Right, and I know when all of our trauma happened, when Jimmy and I turned in his dad for sexually abusing children, his dad went to prison, and I searched high and low for resources to help me as the mother now of this family. I had a job to do, excuse me for the cracking voice, to try to keep our family intact. All the children were grieving. We all were grieving. We were a broken family, and I could not find the resources that I needed to help. I really could not find anything.
Well, and I thought too, even the media doesn't write about or even think about. It's not even that they're an afterthought; it's that they're not a thought. The family members. Look at the Larry Nassar case. When this story, it's still everywhere in the media, but when this story broke, that he had been arrested, and of course the sentencing, very public sentencing back in January, I didn't find any articles that referenced his wife and his children.
No, and you will not. And you mentioned something, just that word public. There suddenly, a family becomes very public, and they are under the scope of everyone in their community, and also far and wide. The news picks up on these cases, and you are no longer a private family. You have been exposed to, the media. You have been exposed publicly now, and it's terribly difficult to live through that. There is a a layer of shame, a layer of guilt, a layer of fear. You have all of that to deal with, and resources are not there to help guide the family through that.
Yeah, I mean, literally everything is unknown, and that's
right.
There's that. We've talked about this before, that, and I think people who are family members of abusers understand this. But we say death would be better than living in the aftermath of abuse.
It's interesting
because it's final.
Yeah, right, that you said that, because I just was speaking by way of email to a wife of her husband was sent to prison for molesting their child, and she said to me through this email, "I wish that he had died. It would be a lot easier to explain and a lot easier to put some closure to this."
Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah, it's just so many unknowns.
Right.
So, another reason is just the lack of resources during our most desperate time of need. I can think back to when you and I found out, I think the same day or within the same day.
Right.
It
was
probably within 24 hours, I'd say.
It was, right.
And when you're in a moment of crisis, you need help right now. And, one of the things that I see as a minister myself, I have a whole new respect for trying to understand and determine when somebody is in crisis, and dropping everything in my schedule and then helping them right now. Because their crisis, sadly, is not other people's crises. It's just not, it's not how it works.
Right.
But we need to understand that when they're in crisis, they need help right now.
That immediate brokenness is, I like to explain it like a person is bleeding to death. They may need surgery in the future, but right now they need that bleeding to be stopped. Somehow they need help with that bleeding, or they can't survive to get the surgery later on. So as you're right, as family members who are dealing with all of this pain, there's a need, an urgent need for some kind of help immediately when that truth is disclosed.
Yes. So another reason, we just see this overwhelming lack of spiritual leaders who are stepping forward to help survivors. Now, there's some out there, but one of the things that I don't see them doing is speaking out publicly. I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and she was saying that there are ministers and other church leaders who say, well, we help people privately. But they don't publicly say, we are here to help, right, to honor, and to back up and stand behind people who've been oppressed, people who've been suppressed, and we're going to stand up and we're going to surround them, and we're going to shield them from their abusers. Church leaders aren't doing it.
Big difference between doing something very privately and that being that person that becomes that voice that people can lean on. And I think that's why, a lot of the reason why you are being used as a resource and as a person who provides comfort and help and truth, and because you are speaking out. You have, from the moment you learned about this, you have been a voice for the abused, and that's so critical. Yeah.
Well, then finally, our last reason is, probably not our last, but we could think of 100 more reasons.
Right.
But just our combined experiences of living with a highly sophisticated religious pedophile. Mom and I both felt that, for her to write separately and me to write separately, we have two very different perspectives and angles and experiences under the same roof with the same abuser. And we felt like it's almost foolish of us to not pull those resources and come together as one voice.
Right.
And help people.
Right. Jimmy, as being the son of a pedophile, had a much different relationship with his dad than I did as being his wife for almost 40 years. I was a minister's wife. He was the minister. I watched this man serve people. I believed in him. I trusted him. He was my minister, my spiritual guide, as well as Jimmy's spiritual guide. So, but we have different relationships with this same person, and I think Jimmy's right to separate those two and to try to explain the path that we followed separately is just not as convenient or as successful in sharing with you as this format would be, as the podcast, because we can each talk from our different perspective, and you can get a better feel for what our home was like living with this pedophile unknown to us.
Yeah, and as a child, your memories are just different altogether. But I went into ministry because of him.
Right.
Out of 11 kids,
Right.
I was the one who just felt so drawn, and I idolized what he was doing. And I just remember when he would stand up there and preach week after week, I would daydream about what that would be like to stand up there, and that's my memory as a child. And as a wife,
Right.
as a spouse, you have completely different memories.
I do, and as a child, I came from a broken home, and I became a Christian at the age of 12. I prayed for one thing and one thing only: a Christian husband. And I was when I graduated high school, I was given the opportunity to go to a state school, completely tuition free, and I passed that up because I wanted to go to a private Christian school, because I wanted to meet a Christian husband. And so we each had dreams and hopes and beliefs in this man. And I don't know if our audience listeners can fully understand the crushing blow that this has been to both of us, as well as all our family, and to the church, to people who loved and adored your dad.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard to put even into words yet what that heartbreak is like, and it truly is.
Yeah, completely. So we wanted to kind of talk about the future, and as people subscribe to this podcast, what can you expect, and how are we going to lay this out in the future? So we've kind of outlined some general goals and things that we want to do with this podcast and to help our listeners. So I'll kind of talk about some areas where I'd like to go in the near future, and then Mom can share some of her ideas. But some of my goals, my hope for the listeners is number one, first and foremost, to know that you're not alone. It is astounding to me how many abuse victims of whatever kind of abuse it is, whether it's domestic violence, or whether it's child sexual abuse, or whether it's sexual abuse within a marriage, they're groomed to think that they're the only person, and what I'm finding is that many survivors legitimately believe that they're the only ones. We've got to break that silence, and we've got to let people know you're not alone. I mean, there are millions of survivors of abuse that are out there who are living in this fear and anxiety, and we just want to break that mold and let you know you're not alone. Second is just that you can and you will overcome. There's power in sharing your story and finding somebody who believes in you. And, I think we saw that with the unprecedented case with Larry Nassar and what happened with that. There were 256 survivors who came forward, and not just came forward publicly, they went on record and they gave their impact statements. They gave their name and they gave their impact statement, and with the media in the room. I can't imagine.
No, I can't either. That just gives me chills as you are saying that again. It really does.
Yeah.
There is such power in that. And to think that one person began, that one person speaking out, gave that ripple effect, that power to others to do the same.
Yeah, and had Rachel Denhollander was the one who really pushed and pushed and pushed, and it even got a law degree. She really wanted to take Larry Nassar down,
right.
Not because of her abuse, but because she knew he was abusing other little girls.
Right.
And so she literally was unstoppable, and she would not quit until justice was sought out, and she won.
Absolutely, and how she empowered others is just wonderful.
Yeah.
It truly is.
So you can and you will overcome. I also want this to be a resource for church leaders. A lot of people email me and they'll say, how do I even begin to broach this subject with my church leaders? Because all they want is, prosperity type stuff, and they want to only share the blessings of Christ, and, they don't want to talk about the ugly stuff. And so I want these podcasts to be a resource that you can take individual episodes and drop them in the lap of your church leaders and say, you need to listen to this. We talk about love. It's not a loving thing. If you know that somebody's in imminent danger, it's not a loving thing to not warn that person and say, you're about to drive off a cliff. None of us would do that to our own kids, to keep them in the blind and pretend like they don't face any threats when we know that they do. That's not a loving thing.
Absolutely, and I love this idea, Jimmy, that you have of being able to take an individual podcast and simply say, listen to this. Often we don't have the words. We flounder with the right words. We're very emotional when we're trying to talk about such a subject that is full of such emotion and pain and hurt. But when you can say, listen to this, here it is, listen. That is a big prayer of Jimmy's and mine, that you will be able to do that.
Yeah. And finally, for me, I want people to have tangible tools for knowing abusers' tactics and to learn how to intercede. Not many people are talking about prevention because it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't know how to prevent it. And so we hear this, well, education. Education is just a small part of it. So, one of the unique things that I do is I come back and I say, we need to teach the actual techniques and tactics that abusers are using, because they're highly skilled. It's not just about manipulation. They're using very specific technical techniques that they've honed over time, and they're doing it to maintain silence with the child, and they're literally abusing these kids right in front of the parents. And again, what I liked about the publicity of the Larry Nassar case is that you have a pretty typical offender. The guy was smart and all that, right. but honestly, Larry Nassar is just a typical pedophile.
Right.
And he abused victim after victim after victim right in front of their parents, literally while they were sitting in the same room.
As you were saying that, Jimmy, I am sure there are people listening who are kind of nodding their heads, no, it can't happen that way. It does happen that way. And often. And Jimmy has just that certain intuitive wisdom, I'll call it, and a way of speaking very practically that he will share and explain, and you will be able to think back and think, oh my, now I get it. Now I know what I saw. And the prevention is huge. I'm so glad that's going to be part of this.
Yeah, we've got to be able to intercede.
Right.
And so I hope through the podcast we can give a little bit of that education, but I want to talk a lot about very specific techniques that abusers are using, because it's so much more than just educating people. That's just a fraction of what we need to be doing.
Right. Absolutely. I'm going to deal with, from a wife's standpoint, a more practical issues, and I'll not go into all of them here, but I will talk about things of how can you overcome the shame of it all. There is a shame that the wife carries when her husband has been molesting children, and we'll talk in depth about that. What do you say to your children when your spouse ends up in jail? How do you deal with that as a wife who is now, maybe she was not the head of the household, and now she's suddenly in charge of all the children, the bills, the home, the everything, and it's overwhelming. What happens if my church friends don't understand and they abandon me? And things like, should I believe the promises of I'll never do it again? What if you're hit with that and your heart kind of caves and you think, well, he'll never do it again? What do you do? These are the types of things that I'll be talking about along with Jimmy.
Yeah, and how do you separate out too, detaching yourself emotionally from the person? Because quite frankly, when somebody's in front of us crying and they're saying that they're so sorry for what they've done and they've ruined so many lives and they've ruined your life and they're asking for forgiveness, that's a very believable thing. And so our emotions tend to override very specific facts that are right in front of us, where they're not evidencing at all any of the fruits of repentance.
Right.
And so we fall for the words, and they know it.
And boy, is that hard. It's so hard, because we've been entrenched with the forgiveness of everyone, no matter what. And it's very, very difficult to see through, to see the truth. And that's where I think, Jimmy, your expertise is going to help us so much.
Well, we hope that many of you subscribe and that you share this with people, because we do want many people to hear this message. And I think as we share a little bit of our story, our personal story, and just talk about what that experience was like for us and kind of how we wound up here, 7 years later, we're here now,
right,
talking freely about it and
right,
blogging and podcasting. I hope that just encourages and empowers people to be able to speak up and speak out about abuse.
Absolutely. That is our hope and our prayer.
So we'll end with this. Mom and I were both talking, and we would like to end each episode with what we call a truth bomb. It's pretty creative, isn't it? We didn't come up with the term, trust me. So we just want to leave one truth bomb at the end of each podcast. And so for this one, our truth bomb is that you can expect that when an abuser is outed, it's going to be a person who's closest to you. When abusers are outed, when people find out about abusers, it's always somebody's loved one. It's their father, it's their uncle, their grandfather, their spouse, their church leader, their mentor. It's always going to be somebody who's very close to somebody else. These are not rogue abusers who are detached from society. They're highly socially skilled child molesters, and we were shocked when it was our father. So yeah, we had to wrap our mind around that. So I would say just mentally prepare yourself that if an allegation of abuse lands on your doorstep, be prepared in case it's somebody who's very close to you. Be prepared to report and detach yourself emotionally and to just look at the facts. As always, thank you for tuning in to the Speaking Out on Abuse podcast with Jimmy and Clara Hinton. You can subscribe to the podcast through either of our websites, findingahealingplace.com, jimmyhinton.org, or through iTunes. Please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode.